In a letter to Majority Leader Mitch McConnell today, Senators Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, and Kamala Harris said the Senate Republican police reform bill was not salvageable. They're threatening to block the Justice Act, saying the bill is, quote, so threadbare and lacking in substance that it does not even provide a proper baseline for negotiations. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina authored the Justice Act, but he's not the only Republican with a police reform bill. Indiana Senator Mike Braun joins me now. He introduced the Reforming Qualified Immunity Act today. He's also a co-sponsor of Senator Scott's bill. Senator Braun, it is good to see you again. Welcome. Let's start with qualified immunity. That is the judicial doctrine that prevents people from suing police officers over excessive force claims. Last week on CBSN, you said that eliminating qualified immunity was a non-starter, and now your bill looks to reform it instead. So how would your measure do that exactly?
So I think that's the place where if we did that for the sake of law enforcement across the country who's been stigmatized by these recent events that are horrific, but I think they're going to carry that mantle around until they accept something that's going to prevent it in the future. So qualified immunity evolved from the 60s through the 80s to where certain judicial guidelines were put in there that made it almost impossible for someone who's had their civil rights violated or lose their lives, families wanting to get some compensation, some way to make it right. It's currently not easy to do. So what mine would do, it doesn't eliminate it. It just says that for those egregious examples, you're going to have a way to do it. And your immunity is going to be if there is a federal or state law that says what you're accused of doing is legal, or if there's a court ruling that would be out there. Anything beyond that, you're going to have that liability that's going to go along with the egregious instances that have occurred recently. So it's trying to, as simply and clearly as possible, differentiate from the bombardment of frivolous lawsuits, because when you're in law enforcement, it's a hard, dangerous job, and I don't think many policemen want to be thinking about what to do in everything that they have to do. But they need to know when there's a point beyond which you don't go, and this bill would try to do it, to where there's liability along with the department itself to try to get rid of these egregious examples to where it's gone too far, and then basically prevent frivolous lawsuits, which are part of the fabric of our society. And we put the text together, I think, that does that.
So Senator Scott, as you know, has said that limiting qualified immunity would be a poison pill for some Republican lawmakers. And this week, the Supreme Court declined to hear a case that would have revisited this very issue. As a conservative, what is the argument from your perspective for reforming qualified immunity, and what kind of support do you actually have from both Republicans and Democrats?
So when it comes to support, you're not going to get much on something like this until, number one, it's got an actual chance of making it to the floor. And this just was dropped today. So I think that if we do get something done, because right now the Democrats are saying they're not going to vote to move the bill forward. There will be no Republican votes for the House version that eliminates qualified immunity. So we'll be like we many times get here, Hatfields and McCoys, and we do nothing for the American public that makes sense. And the reason what I'm talking about makes sense as a conservative is it's based upon transparency and responsibility. And that if your actions go beyond the pale, there's no other place where you're protected from that kind of behavior other than in other parts of government. And this, I think, for the police, look at it in a way to remove that burden from your back, because you will not request immunity for cases like these most recently. It's always difficult to have any type of change, and law enforcement, you know, I run on a law and order campaign when I ran for senator, but I also have other principles that are important, and that's you need to be able to make sure that when you've got constitutional rights or where you lose your life, that you've got the ability to have some type of pathway to address the concerns. And this bill, I think, gets as close as anybody has come to doing it. And it could be a place where we could land if there will be an amendment process to where people can start debating it, maybe fine tune it, and get something done.
Does your bill have the support of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell?
I think it's going to have the support of many people that currently aren't out there, including maybe even the president, if they measure it by, first of all, is there something wrong with transparency and individual responsibility? We generally, all as conservatives, embrace it. The other side of the aisle does normally as well. We have just evolved to a place where we're in camps, and I think that if the cost is that nothing happens, maybe there might be a consideration of it. I know there are several Democrats I've spoken to, and many in the Republican caucus, that if it's reforming it and not eliminating it, it should at least be on the debate table to where we're talking about it.
You are a co-sponsor on Senator Scotts Justice Act, and we mentioned earlier that Senate Democrats are effectively rejecting the plan that Republicans brought to the table. What do you make of that? Do you think that Democrats are negotiating in good faith on this?
You know, I think that when you take a lot of what Tim is talking about, a lot of that is in their bill as well. But there are three categories that I think get from what most of us would agree to. And here's where the meat of the issue is. It would have to do with no-knock entries. It has to do with qualified immunity, which we've talked about. And then will you actually bar chokeholds and knee holds? Those are the three issues that are meatier than the ones that, you know, are in our bill. And most of those that are in our bill, there are similar ones in theirs. But unless, especially qualified immunity, if that's not addressed, I'm fearing that we're going to be at an impasse and nothing happens. And that's disappointing because it happens so often here.
In our final 30 seconds or so, what do you think the chances realistically are? I mean, given the political landscape that exists right now, that police reform will pass in Congress?
So I think that if we probably don't bring the reforming qualified immunity into the picture, that you won't get any Democrats coming over, and they'll need to trust the process that what we're going through would let us have a legitimate debate on it for an up or down vote. And I think you'd see a cascade of support come forward if we had that opportunity to do it. I've only been here a year and a half, and I see it doesn't happen very often. I feel good about what I'm doing because I think the moral compass is pointing in the right direction.
Well, it is clear the American people, if you look at polls, if you look at what is happening in these demonstrations, clearly want something to be done. Senator Mike Braun for us. Senator, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Really appreciate it.